Hello, Oasis.
Hey.
Yo.
Is it kind of odd that we're about to talk a little bit about sex in the podcast? We just all started laughing.
Well, that's how we're going to start. I was going to try and
This is a serious topic. There will be no laughter as we have this discussion.
I'm laughing all the time.
That's good. Needs a little levity.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, before we dive in, I got to know, is there like a snack that if you're around it, you just can't like stop eating it?
I don't know if there's a snack when I'm around it that I do have restraint against.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. If
I'm
it's
a snack
there,
guy.
I'm eating it.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
When Eiley and I got married, she's always been a snack person, but she has unbelievable self-control. Just like I'm talking like if there's a bag of candy, she will eat one piece. Like not like every once in a while, one piece like a day.
Yeah.
If there is so when we got married, we had to have this discussion that if she goes grocery shopping, you can't buy that stuff because I can't have that in the cupboard when I open it.
For sure.
If there are Oreos, I will eat the Oreos.
Yeah.
I will eat 14 Oreos 30 minutes before dinner.
For sure. The sleeve's gone in a minute.
100%.
Yeah.
Like I can't have that.
Little
Like she wants chips, but I can't not eat that whole bag of chips.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm alone.
Yeah. No, I'm right there too. Little Debbie snacks is one that's like if we have those in the house, they're gone in a day and a half. It's a problem. Chips and salsa for sure. Okay. I think there was one week I went through 2.5 cans of salsa, which tells you how many chips I ate with the salsa. Yeah. No, it's a problem. Abby has learned to hide her candy from me.
Yeah, smart.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what I should teach Al. Like if you really want a snack, just put it in a
place.
place.
Somewhere you know I don't know where it's at. Yep.
And I think if she put it in a place and I even knew the spot, I think if I didn't open it, I'd be okay.
If she and you knew she bought it for herself.
Yeah. Hey,
that's,
she bought
that's
chips,
a thing.
but they're in this cabinet, and as long as I never open that cabinet, I'm gonna be okay.
I just can't know where it's at because if I know where it's at, I'm gonna look. If they're not open, I won't open it. That's where we cross the line. Yeah. If they're open, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one night she got some ice cream, brought a pint home, and I said, "You want to have ice cream tonight?" And then she went to go put our daughter to bed, and once she was gone, I started eating ice cream. So she came out like 20 minutes later, and she was like, "Bruh,
where's my ice cream?"
Yeah, she was like, "Are we gonna have ice cream?" And I was like, I just had some," and she couldn't believe it. And I was like, "It was in my head. I don't know what you wanted from. I couldn't wait another 30 minutes." Anyways, what about you?
That's good.
I go crazy for chocolate chip cookies.
Okay. Like fresh baked or any kind?
Like literally any kind.
Okay.
Like Chips Ahoy, break apart, stick them in the oven.
Do you like them a little more chewy, soft, or do you like them hard?
I like them crispy on the bottom.
Crispy on the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay. You like cook them, but then you leave them on the pan a little too long. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I see that.
But then like they're so tiny.
Okay.
And so then you're just like, well, like 2 isn't enough. And so then you like have more. And you're like, well, at this point, I might as well have the whole dozen.
Yeah.
And then it's like,
correct. It's
yeah.
Allie doesn't bake anymore for that specific reason. If she bakes, 75% of that has to go to her work.
Yeah.
That's I'll eat a couple, but then they have to leave.
Yeah.
She loves to bake, but I'm sorry.
I'll make a pie every 6 months just because I know I'm the only one who eats it. So I just eat a whole pie in a week. But I have to wait myself. I have to wait 6 months to make another pie. I want one tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I'll have to wait 3 more months because I had one 3 months ago.
Yeah. Self-control. I'm good at some things, just not snacks.
Yeah, dude. Food's a problem, but we're getting better.
Anyways, go ahead, Emily. Let's go.
All right. So, a lot of you know, like part of my job here is doing a lot of research and just kind of picking out the topics of what we do for our podcast. And over the past couple of months, a lot of topics we've done have kind of hinted at the fact that we're missing just a lot of guidance in discipleship and what it looks like to follow God with our bodies, especially when it comes to sex and like what it looks like to like follow God and like according to what he's designed for us. And so I think there's just a lot of confusion. There's a lack of knowledge. And then for some of us, like we just don't have the strength or like don't feel like we have the strength to actually adhere to that when we look at the culture we're in. And so kind of just to like paint a picture of what's happening in our generation, the Gospel Coalition, they kind of reported some stats on what Christian men and women, especially young adults, experience when it comes to pornography. And so they said that 64% of Christian men are actively engaging in pornography. That number is 33% for women, which is a lot higher now than in recent decades. And they said that young adults monthly, 76% of young adults are actively seeking out content. The National Institute of Health reported that 72% of college students will like have a hookup or a one-night stand with another student by the time they graduate. And then even like to kind of bring this in home for us, like I was on campus last year and I was eating at Larson. And when I left Larson, there was just like a poster of a trivia night that someone was doing. And like the prize that you got for every question was a sex toy. And like, I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, this is real for our people. And part of like what makes this topic hard is like, I was raised very purity culture of like, we don't talk about sex. And if we do talk about sex, you just don't. It's bad unless you're married. And so it's very restrictive. Or we just like go to the other side where it's like we have no guidance at all and it's a free for all. And so part of this podcast is just trying to like redefine what does it look like to follow God in a world that is just consumed with sex.
Yeah, I mean, what's the quote that pornography is the wallpaper of our society?
Wallpaper of the society, yeah.
I don't remember.
It's such a norm that it's everywhere, and it just becomes not. I don't even know what the word I'm trying to look for is. A norm to just everyday life. Yep.
Well, go ahead. We'll talk about different things where, like even when we scroll on Instagram or TikTok, or you jump on a streaming service, or you're looking at like clothes or models or different things like that as you try to shop, like we do become so indoctrinated and it becomes so normal for us that we're not even shocked by a lot of that anymore.
Yeah.
And pornography, I think, is this word that can be confusing for people. And I don't know exactly how the Gospel Coalition used it, but sometimes we pigeonhole what pornography is, and we just say it's the digital online consumption of video stuff. But really, pornography is, if you look at the definition, it's sexually suggestive material such as pictures, videos, text, audio, anything intended for sexual arousal. Yeah. And so it's not like, hey, every billboard has like straight up actual video porn on it, but everywhere you go, there is this sexually suggestive material that's being fed to us that most of us, we don't even notice it anymore. We don't take any caution around it because it's just so prevalent everywhere we go.
Yeah. Can I share a funny story before we dive in?
Go ahead, yeah.
When I first started working here back in 2010.
I know this story. Keep going.
On our computers, that we use for work, they had some software on them, something, I don't know if it's a Covenant Eyes type thing, where if a church-owned computer had any indication of someone looking at, like, searching something that had to do with pornography, any suggested materials, whatever it might be, it would go to a supervisor of that person, and they would just have an accountability conversation. Like, hey, this flight, just wondering what your hand on. I was at a worship night. It would have been December of 2010. I was an interim youth pastor at the church. And my boss came up to me and said, hey, we have a problem. He said, this certain website got flagged, and it said that your computer, like you were going to this website, and do you know what this website is? And he showed me, he's like, I have no idea what this website is. Yeah. I have no idea, like legit no idea what's happening. I'm like, I'm getting fired. I'm not going to be in ministry anymore. Like I'm freaking out. I just got married. My wife's going to kill all these things. And I'm just like, this is right before I'm getting ready to lead a worship service. Yeah. And so I go sit in a pew, and Abby comes over and go, Rick just came up and said, like, this happened on my computer. And she immediately turns red. And she thought, and this is how just naive and just, it's really funny and beautiful, actually. She was one day at my office I think I was doing something in the activity center, getting ready for a service or something. And she was on my computer, and she needed to buy new bras and underwear. And so she decided to use my computer to go to, I don't even know what website, and buy bras and underwear for herself. And that got flagged to my boss as for lingerie or for underwear that I was looking at something.
Oh my goodness.
I was not doing that. My heart sank.
Yeah.
My heart sank. Anyway, I just wanted to tell a funny story before we dive in.
That is so tough, dude. That is so tough.
It's so good. My wife almost got me fired from a church job. It's good times.
Well, we're glad you're still here.
I'm glad I'm here.
But I think as we keep going, there's a lot of places we could start this conversation, but I think we just need to start with the fact that God created our bodies. And because God created our bodies, he values and cares about what he creates. And because he created us, he also gave us a purpose. And I think a lot of times when we have conversations about sex and within our culture, we have to remember that God has a specific purpose for our life. And when we live into that purpose, we live into, like, we flourish. And when we live against that purpose, we're living in sin. But sin isn't just like a bad thing. It's actually living beneath what God actually created us for. Yeah.
And there's something about talking about sin and the body. where we can get into this idea of like, okay, sin has so corrupted the body that some of the things we experience in the body we were never ever meant to experience. And so we talk about sexual arousal or sexual attraction, and we're like, sometimes we get to this place where I was never meant to experience that because it's so broken, it's so perverted, it's so impure, where it's like, no, what sin actually does is it took what God made to be pure and it makes it impure. And so we were designed with like to be sexual beings. There's part of us that
we are designed as sexual beings.
Yeah, there's part of us that's how God created us, and yet it's the corruption of that. And it's with all emotions, right? Like God has given us righteous anger, and then what sin does is it corrupts that to unrighteous anger. God has given us righteous like ideas of protection, like anxiety or hunger, right? Like these things that those could be really healthy to protect you from dangerous stuff. But what the enemy does is he brings those into destructive habits. And so then anxiety rules over us, or our stomachs become our lords. And so there's these things in the body where it's, how do we get it back to redemptive? Like, because God made it, because he cares about it, because there's value in it. Like, how do we bring it back to this redemptive state, knowing that sin has corrupted these things?
Yeah, that's good.
I think too, like God also provides clarity. He didn't just put us here and said, all right, read my mind and do everything like the right way. Yeah. He in the Old Testament, like gave his people the law, and the law explained like even like what to do if you have like a medical condition, like in the community. Like that's how carefully God crafted the law, that anything you needed could be found in it. And then we also see like the life and the teachings of Jesus. We can look at not just what Jesus said, but also how Jesus lived. And that informs us of things of what it means to actually follow him. And then,
I mean, even just with that, like Jesus. So one of the 4 P's I talk about God's design for sex is proclamation. In proclamation, like Jesus proclaimed something with his body and sex by his choice to be abstinent in singleness. And so it's just even that example of that, and what you're choosing to do, you're proclaiming there is a greater purpose, greater design, and there's one that we can follow and know.
And I think we still encounter like places that are gray. Like God's word doesn't tell you where to go to college, but he also gives us his spirit. And so in the places that are gray and in the places where we lack strength, like we're not left unequipped, we're not left without strength. We have the spirit living inside of us that is capable and able to guide us in the things that are holy and that are right. We just have to be willing to participate.
Yeah. I have a new kid. You guys know
What?
this? Yeah. But I've been seeing, I saw this video that someone shared with me where they put like a playpen in their living room with like 4 walls on it. And then they put a bunch of toys in there, and then they put their kid in this playpen. Yeah. And I saw it, and I was like, oh, that feels really weird to like put your kid in like a playpen in which they couldn't. But then on the video, the reason they shared it with me is there was this child doctor, pediatrician.
Yeah.
So pediatrician showed up and she said, actually, this is a really, really good idea, because when you put the child in that playpen, it was probably a 6x6 square area, and you put only that which is safe in that, it actually helps the child to learn a sense of freedom as they can move around, knowing that everything in there their parent has placed with safety. And so if you remove the walls and you say, hey kid, go wherever you want and touch whatever you want, that inhibits freedom, because now they might bump up against things that hurt them. But to create a space to put walls around something, to say, here's your boundaries and everything in here is safe for you, is actually so loving to the child. And some of that is what God has done for us with our bodies, is instead of saying, do whatever you want with your body, and now we have this freedom to do whatever we want, and we're going to find hurt and pain and scars and brokenness. God has said, no, actually there's boundaries that I'd like you to exist within your body. And there are places that are safe and aren't safe. And I've called some things in bounds and some things out of bounds. And as you live in the bounds of God's design for your body, you actually find a greater sense of freedom, because you say, everything God has designed me to do, if I live in that, there's beauty there, and there's safety there, and I actually experience a greater trust and reliance on my Heavenly Father.
Good. It's body, sex, anything that God created. It's divine design. Where in that design, there's specific boundaries and guidelines for our good and His glory. That's good.
Totally.
That's really good.
I think from the outside it looks restrictive, like to set up boundaries. But Rich Viotis, he wrote a book called The Narrow Path, and part of a lot of the quotes here today come from that book. But he talks about how like those who, like the narrow path isn't about the number of people who end up in heaven. It's about the number of people who will allow themselves to be formed by the subversive and ultimately redemptive way of Jesus. And so it's not about just like checking a box so you can get somewhere. Part of living into God's boundaries is, yes, going against the grain, like swimming upstream, doing what no one else is doing. But within that, it's not just for you to do something different. God is deeply transforming your life and redeeming your life in that process. And so none of like living into God's boundary is not void. It is actually transforming your life, whether you see it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you have to say no to some things so you can say yes to greater things. Yep. And that's exactly what the narrow way is you got to say no to a lot of stuff. Yeah. Tons of stuff. Most of the world, what is offering, you got to say no to that.
Yeah.
So that you can say yes to the things that are most precious and most good for you.
Sex is like a fire.
Yeah, I know.
And the fireplace keeps us warm. Outside the fireplace, it'll burn the house down.
Totally.
Ray Orland. Yeah. I love that quote.
But it's good.
It's right.
Because it's this picture. In the right context, something is beautiful. It's life-giving.
It's good. Yeah,
it's good. In the wrong context, it's
destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's keep going here.
Got a lot of stuff on sex,
we have
guys.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah, totally.
So, God created us. He has a purpose for us, and when we live in that purpose, we live in the fullest life possible. But God also designed sex. And so if you look in Genesis chapters 1-3, you see the story of creation. Genesis 3 is where sin happens. Sex actually appears in Genesis 2. Mm-hmm. So sex was around before sin entered the world, and God calls it good. Sex is not dirty, but within that, God creates a context for sex to be practiced, and it is between one man and one woman who are married.
Here's a question. I think people hear that, and they say, okay, I see that, but I don't really believe that. How do we get back to a place of even redeeming in our minds the fact that sex can be clean? Does that make sense?
I think so.
So in our mental space, we can say, okay, yes, God created sex and he made us sexual beings and there is a good side of sex and all this stuff. And yet every time we try to have a conversation around sex, it's shame and guilt and uncomfortable. And I don't want to talk about that. And this makes me feel weird. And so then it has this sense of dirtiness to it.
Yep.
And it leads to unhealthy purity culture, or it leads to just we're never going to talk about it. Or how do we get to a place where actually, as you listen to this and as we talk about it around the table, we can normalize the idea that sex is clean and good and beautiful?
It's consistency in language, in teaching, and in comfortability. Yeah. And so we also are really comfortable talking about emotions. Yeah. So change the idea of sex too. Why are we uncomfortable talking about emotions? Because most of us don't know.
Or politics.
We don't know how to handle it. Mm-hmm. We maybe haven't been taught it, or what we've seen or experienced gives us a sense of what we've assumed are wrong feelings, and we don't know how to handle those wrong feelings. Therefore, we shut down and don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So you have to deal with the negative aspects of what you've either experienced or been taught, and then speak truth and healthy language into those areas, all areas. Mm-hmm. So talk about sex. All right, you have to be really honest with what are your preconceived either notions about, or what are your thoughts about it? Why do you, most of the time, especially in the church, why we don't want to talk about it. It's not just well, I just never talked about it, so I don't know how. It's no, because I've experienced something with it, and in that experience, I either, because of what I was taught or wasn't taught, I am wrong. Mm-hmm. And so we almost make it an identity thing, or it is a moral thing, but in such a way that it becomes a way that we don't believe it can be redeemed, because then we also don't talk about the redeeming side of it too. Mm-hmm. So it's both. I think you call what's negative, you call what people's experience, you be honest about it, and you speak into what is God's redemption in it, and how does God redeem it?
Yeah.
I think, and it's got to be consistent in it. The more you talk about it, the more comfortable you can get.
Yeah.
But if you talk about it in the wrong ways, the wrong language,
I think that's the hard part though too, is okay, then you have someone who listens to the podcast, I got to talk about it. And they go to their significant other who are there in a dating relationship, and then they just want to talk about sex. And it's that's probably not your healthy space to experience it too.
For sure.
And that can be wounding you go to your friend group. It's hey man, I think as a friend group, we got to start being more open and honest about what sex is. But now you're the weird guy who talks about sex in your friend group,
sure.
and they don't know how to receive it. And now you're having pushback there. And so it's how do we have this? It feels like it's such a macro level of oppression, and there's so many pitfalls that when we try to bring about a redemptive narrative, we bump up against constant thing. And that totally makes sense.
Yes.
As we try to bring about redemption, there's an enemy pushing back, and he's created systems of oppression. He's placed things in society that are gonna push back against that.
Yeah.
And yet I think it's just really hard to get to this place.
Yeah. It is.
And that's okay. How do we help the people?
Something that's been helpful for me, especially as someone who is single and has never had sex before, and grew up very, very strong purity culture. When I see the distortion of sex, my first thing that I would say to myself is this is bad. I am bad. There is shame here. Yeah. And so something I've been working on is when I'm watching a TV show and a scene comes up that I didn't know was going to be up there, that was an accident. I did not intend for that to be there, but it's saying, not that this is bad, but this is a distortion of something that's good. And so because of that, then disassociating, calling something good versus bad, but saying sex is good, I saw a distortion, which was not good. And so still holding to the truth that there is a context for where sex can be good, but there's also like an active way in which like we're just experiencing the distortion, whether it's pornography, whether it's hookup culture, whether it's just sex before marriage. Like there is a way for it to be good, but then understanding this was a distortion.
No, I like that. That's great.
I mean, it's also difficult. That is an incredible response, but what makes it more difficult is because it can be damaged so easily, sex, and our bodies can be damaged so easily. And because it can be damaged so easily and it's really hard to repair and redeem, what makes it more difficult and what makes it, I think you've already mentioned this, is that our 90% of culture in the world treat it like it's nothing. And so until you use that kind of language, it'll just keep being hard to fully see it be redeemed. That like is a good thing God created that, man, just unfortunately 99% of most people's experiences are distorted reality of what God intended it for.
But let's keep going through like some of the things that like we see in practice with sex that are distorted because of sin. I think the first one is like we minimize the effects of sin and we justify small compromises. And I think it's really easy for us to just kind of not fully understand the weight of what sin does to us. And we kind of rank sin arbitrarily based on like the effects and consequences it has. But we forget that any type of sin is separating us from God. And that is insane. Like there is a depravity when you are separated from God. And so like there's a quote from another lady named Tish Warren. She's fire. She's awesome. But I think when it comes to how we use our bodies, she said that like sexual sin is a scandal in the scriptures, not because the apostles were blushing prigs, but because our skin and muscles and feet and hands are more sacred than any communion chalice or baptismal font. Ignoring scripture's teaching about the proper use of the body and using our bodies for our own false worship is a misuse of the sacred, akin to using consecrated bread and wine in a Wiccan goddess ceremony. And so it's just like we lose the gravity of what it means to use our bodies in ways that are against God's design.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Cloud's got like 15 quotes lately that I feel like I can pull from here, but what's the 2% compromise that's going to lead you? And the other quote that it's like, nobody wakes up one day and chooses to blow up their life. Like nobody wakes up one day and says, you know what, today I'm going to be shackled to pornography. And today I'm going to be an adulterer in my relationship. And today I'm going to be like, nobody wakes up and says that, but there's something that you walked in for probably a period of time that led you to this place where, man, now you can't find freedom. And so some of the times you got to go back to the beginning and what do I actually believe about this sin? Do I believe it's wrong? Do I believe, I like the language of it's dehumanizing to me and others? That's what broken sexuality is I no longer see myself as the way God created me as a human being, and I no longer interact with others in that way. And when you get that mindset, then sexual sin really can become perverted and like really, really broken. Or even, go ahead.
I was going to move on, but keep going.
No, or even, I think Matthew 5 has to play in here of when Jesus talks about adultery. Like when he says, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. If your hand leads you to sin, cut it off, because it's better to enter into the kingdom without an eye or an arm than it is to go to the gates of hell and perish. Like, I mean, that language, we read that and say, oh, Jesus is just speaking in hyperbole.
He's just being dramatic.
Right, and I don't think if we actually lived in that, you would see every Christian walking without eyes and arms. Like, that's the teaching of Jesus. Yet, he wants us to wrestle with the severity of that. He wants us to understand just how broken sexual sin is to the experience of the Christian, that he goes to that length, and we can't just read it and be like, well, Jesus is just being Jesus again. Funny hyperbole guy. No, that's supposed to be unbelievably striking as we read it and go, oh my goodness, like that's the level of seriousness I should take around this issue. Okay, now what's that look like in my life?
That's good.
I think one of the things we do is we compartmentalize, and we say that like sex is just something we do with our body, and it doesn't actually impact our spiritual life. And so we kind of compartmentalize it. Tish Warren, she also says that like our bodies and souls are inseparable. So what we do with our body and what we do with our soul is always entwined. And so when we are engaging in any type of sin, like when our body is engaging in that, we're also like, we're still sinning against God. We're using our body for something that is against what he created and against what he designed. And then we use that same body to seek forgiveness and like come into a worship service. And so there's kind of just like this entwined sense that like there is no such thing as just a physical act. Like, it involves all of who you are.
Yeah.
Well, there's a connection between your sexuality, your sexual behavior, and your soul, which is, I think, what Paul addresses in 1 Corinthians 6.
Yeah.
So he says, don't you know your bodies are members of Christ himself? So I then take the members of Christ and unite them with the, shall I then take the members of Christ, so the people, and unite them with a prostitute? Never. Do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, the two will become one flesh. And he goes on to say, flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside of the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. And there's an aspect of that as you sin against your own body, what you're doing is you're sinning against your own soul. And when it comes to sexuality, he said, and then you can bring in the science of it. There's a reality where what you do in sexual immorality is that you are creating potentially a connection because of dopamine and oxytocin release to whatever is the object of your affection when you are sexually sinning. And so you're creating a connection without the covenant promise and relational commitment, which is why some of people's biggest regrets is sexual sin or some sexual defeat in their life or mishap. And so it's God built our body and he knows how it works best. And so he gave sex as a gift and gave us boundaries and guidelines so that we know how to use it well for our good and for his glory. And when we use it outside of his design and sinning against ourselves, we're sinning against our soul when we have sex outside of what God's designs for us. And so that's, I think, what's hard about some of the languages when it gets talked about that, and when you hear about that, especially in purity culture, that's all you hear is well, just don't do it because it's bad for you. You don't hear the reasons why, and you don't hear the good that it is for. Paul is saying ultimately, don't bind yourself to someone you weren't meant to bind yourself to. He's saying, because if you do that, you're going to lose yourself in some way. It is just destructive for you. So do it to the person you're supposed to bind yourself to. That's where it's healthy and good.
I think the last one here is we choose lust instead of love. Rich Viotis, he kind of defines this. He says, lust is about consumption. Love is about communion. Lust is about taking. Love is about giving. Lust uses. Love honors. Lust diminishes the other. Love cherishes the other. And so when we think about how God created us and the purpose he's given us, it's to know him and to make his glory known. And we do that through representing his love. And that love is sacrificial and self-giving. When we choose lust, we choose, what can I gain from this? How can this person serve me? And so we're actively living against the way that we're called to love someone else.
Love is expensive.
Yeah.
It costs a lot to give and walk in true love. It's hard work to walk in honest love. I've been reading through 1 John 4 a lot lately, looking at this idea of love. And the way he talks about it is, if you know God who is love, then you will walk in love. And so if we see ourselves walking in lust and we see ourselves really struggling with these things of lust, we have to go back to this place of, am I drawing from the source that is true love? And if I'm walking in true love with God, then I will experience true love and I will be able to give true love. And that's all connected. But in that chain of receiving and owning and giving love, lust wants to break in and cut that off. And so you might be trying to receive love from the Father, but all you experience in your body is lust, and then all you can give is lust. And so in there, you have to find a redemptive arc of what actually is true love. And am I willing to walk the narrow road and pay the price to experience, own, and give love so that I can begin to walk in this beautiful, full, abundant life Jesus has offered me?
Yeah, that's good.
And so when we look at kind of all of these three things, it's doing a lot to our generation. And I think we even see this in the people that come with Oasis and what we pray for. There is just so much shame. There's shame in the fact that I can't talk about it because I'll be looked at differently. I'll be hated. I'll be scorned or something. There's the shame that I can't bring this to God because God doesn't love me enough. This is too dirty for him. And so there is just a sense that we hide from God. We hide from others. I think sometimes we even hide from ourselves. We don't want to deal with the fact that we're pursuing things that are against what God desires.
Here's a thought I've been kicking around lately. Correct me if this is too aggressive, but shame is the most powerful tool the enemy has. I'm going to let him sit on it. But here's why. I think it's exactly what you just said. What shame does is first of all, it makes us hide from God. You see that in the Genesis account. And so the one place we can go to find healing, we run away from that because of shame. Shame also drives us away from others, and it creates this separation of dynamic between another place where we could find healing. We find healing back in relationship. We don't find healing in isolation, and so shame drives us. And then what shame does is shame drives you away from yourself. There's a disconnect between who you actually are in Christ and what you start to believe about yourself in Christ. And so what shame does, it's actually cutting tearing down the fibers of what God has created you to be on every level. It drives you away from God, it drives you away from others, and it corrupts your own view of yourself.
I would say lie is the hammer, shame is the nail.
Okay.
That's what
there you go. I like that.
I think because lies is what he used to produce the shame.
Yeah, that's good. But man, it's just like, we know shame. Every person knows shame. You've felt it. You've experienced it. And you know how corrosive it is. And yet it so easily creeps back into our lives.
Because it's so closely connected to something that God uses to help us actually grow into him.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking conviction.
Yes.
Conviction and guilt, or guilt. The guilt's
guilt is unfortunately has a negative connotation, but that's
Or conviction guilt, says I've done wrong.
Well, guilt says guilt is I am admitting that I'm guilty of doing something wrong.
Yeah. And
shame says I am wrong.
I am wrong. Yeah. And it speaks identity, and it speaks value, and it speaks purpose, and oh man, it's nasty.
Yeah.
It's also creating just senses of addiction, like especially with like pornography and especially with the hiddenness of it. There's just a sense like when we look at the people who come to Oasis, like we have no clue like if you're struggling with this. Like you can hide it. You can be alone in your room at night or any time of day and just like online. Like just it's crazy what you have access to.
That's what's hard is the access is insane. The bonding activity in masturbation towards pornography is you're bonding to an experience, which when you're bonding, if you masturbate to pornography, you're releasing dopamine, oxytocin, so you're connecting on a level that you weren't meant to an activity, which you're also saying that relational commitment is necessary, and it becomes an addiction because the amount of times you release, you are chasing that. And so the addiction ultimately becomes a thing in which you by yourself can't break, but is possible to break. And pornography communicates it's okay to exploit, objectify, and devalue people. And you just don't, that's not what we see. What we think is either I'm in an addiction phase, which is a disease, and I need massive help, or I just want immediate gratification because I don't know where to find it anywhere else outside of Jesus. And it's how do you help people who are immediately lost? It doesn't get talked about a lot. And letting them know like you are still an awesome, amazing son or daughter of Christ who has a problem that let's help you deal with it.
Well, and addiction is such a heavy word that when it comes to sexual addiction, it's even less accepted or recognizable because this is what everybody does. This is what our culture is made of. And so I'm not a sex addict. I don't struggle with that is what the narrative becomes. And yet I challenge people, hey, if you are someone who struggles with lust, the way to tell if you struggle with an addiction to your phone, an addiction to Netflix, an addiction to social media, like if you struggle, go without it for an extended period of time. And as you try to go without it, how often and how frequently and how intense is your desire to get back to that thing? And so if you struggle with pornography, watching it on your phone, if you struggle with like sex with a person before marriage, commit to a boundary that says, I'm not going to do that. Give yourself a month, 6 months, whatever it feels like you need, and see what it does to your inside when you try to walk in obedience to that. And if you can't walk in obedience to that, you're shackled to it. That's addiction. But we always say, oh, well, no, it's just, I just want it. And it's like, no, like you were created to want it in a healthy way. And when you don't, and you can't get away from that, you're addicted. And it's not freedom.
I think we need to start wrapping up here,
which
is kind of crazy. But I think the question is like, okay, so like we've kind of diagnosed all of this. So where do we go now? I think we just need to remember like who God is. There is nothing that God cannot redeem or restore. Yet within that, you have to be willing to go to God. You have to be willing to confess, to lay it out before him. And when you do that, he's going to be gentle with you. He's not going to be angry. He's not going to like shame you at all. Like he actually is going to remove that from you. But you have to be willing to confess and find freedom in him. And then part of that is repentance. It is turning and saying, all right, God, like I'm going to choose to walk in the narrow path. And like it's going to be hard, but your spirit's going to be with me. And so it's a twofold confession and repentance.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
And I think part of that, we'll wrap up with this. I think, honestly, we need to be more aggressive when it comes to just like temptation and sin. Like it's not wrong to be tempted, but I think we do not fully understand just the effects of sin has on us or on our relationship with God. We read in Genesis, like God, he says like sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you. And so just kind of like, as you listen to this, are there things that you need to remove from your life? Like, do you need to remove apps? Do you need to set up content blockers? And are there things that you need to add in? Like, do you need to add in accountability? Do you need to add in community or positive influences for that? But yeah.
Yeah, I want to just add I had one thing here. I think we need to be very aggressive against sin in our own lives and very gracious towards sin in other people's lives.
That's super good.
Because I think that's where the breakdown becomes is, okay, I'm going to get really serious and I'm going to work on myself. But when I work on myself, what the enemy is going to do is he's going to spin it and you're going to become self-righteous towards others. And the same thing, you need to find freedom. You're going to put up a wall for other people to also walk in freedom. And so, yes, if you struggle, be very aggressive in how do I rid my life of this temptation and how do I walk in holiness and righteousness, and then be very, very gracious to others who struggle as well, knowing that, man, addiction and shame and brokenness and sin, it's heavy and people need help. And so who are they to go to help except like God is sending us as his people to walk alongside them.
Redemption looks different for everyone. You have to know yourself and what you need. But the graciousness piece is very good.
Yeah.
There you
go.
That's
it for today.
Yeah. That's sex.
That is sex.
That's a terrible way to end it.
That is perfect. Thank you.
I liked it.